Yeah, right, the teacher laughed as the whole class joined in. My dad is Chuck Norris, Malik had said, but nobody believed him. Not even his friends. Until the door swung open, and standing there, in front of everyone, was the man they all thought was just a myth. What happened next left the whole school speechless. Welcome to Chuck Norris Heroics. Let's uncover what really happened. The classroom was filled with the low hum of conversation as the bell rang, signaling the start of the lesson. Mr. Thompson, the history teacher, strode to the front, his eyes scanning the room with a smile. He was used to the banter, the jokes, and the mild chaos that came with a class of rambunctious teenagers. But today, something was different. In the back corner, a quiet voice interrupted the noise. My dad is Chuck Norris. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at Malik, a tall, lean 14-year-old, his voice unshaken despite the sudden attention. Malik was known for his calm demeanor, his way of keeping to himself, never drawing too much attention, until now. Mr. Thompson paused, a chuckle escaping his lips. Right, Malik, and I'm the Queen of England. The class erupted in laughter, the sound filling the space like a wave crashing against a shore. Malik's claim had been met with the usual skepticism, the kind that came with a name like Chuck Norris. Everyone knew him from the movies, the martial arts legend. But Malik? He was just a quiet kid with an air of mystery around him. Malik didn't flinch. He didn't look embarrassed or defensive, just calm as ever. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes remained steady, locked on Mr. Thompson, unblinking. He didn't back down from the laughter. He simply let it happen. Seriously, Mr. Thompson, Malik continued, his voice steady, you'll see. I'm telling the truth. Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, his smirk fading slightly as he looked at the boy. Well, Malik, I suppose if your dad really is Chuck Norris, I'll be seeing him at parent-teacher night, won't I? The class chuckled again, the tension in the air lifting. But Malik's eyes, sharp and unwavering, told a different story. There was something in them, a quiet confidence that suggested, maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a joke. The bell rang, marking the end of another lesson, and the students filed out of the classroom, their chatter filled with whispers and laughter. Malik was one of the last to leave, his bag slung over his shoulder. As he passed Mr. Thompson's desk, the teacher called out to him, Hey, Malik, can I have a word? Malik stopped and turned. Mr. Thompson was sitting behind his desk, his expression softened, almost apologetic. It was the kind of look you gave someone you'd embarrassed, but with a touch of sympathy. Look, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable earlier, Mr. Thompson said, pushing his glasses up his nose. But you've got to admit, that was a bold claim. Chuck Norris is, well, he's Chuck Norris, you know. Malik didn't respond right away. He just stood there, waiting. Mr. Thompson leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. I get it. You want to stand out, maybe get a laugh, but you can't just say things like that. People are going to think you're, well, lying. You understand, right? You don't want to be the joke around here. Malik's gaze never wavered. He nodded slowly, his silence carrying more weight than words ever could. All right, Mr. Thompson said, letting out a small breath. Just be careful, all right? It's not the best way to get attention. Some people aren't going to take it well. With that, Mr. Thompson waved him off, the conversation over as quickly as it had started. But as Malik turned to leave, something shifted. The usual murmur of the hallway was gone, replaced by a few snickers and sideways glances as his classmates filtered out behind him. He could feel their eyes on him, could hear the whispers, but he didn't look back. His dad was Chuck Norris. And soon enough, everyone would know. Malik walked through the crowded hallway, his steps slow, deliberate. The usual hustle of students moving between classes seemed louder today, but it wasn't the noise that caught his attention. It was the way people were looking at him, just as Mr. Thompson had predicted. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Glances darted in his direction. Some were mocking, others curious. He reached his locker and paused, staring at his reflection in the small mirror on the inside of the door. His face remained neutral, but inside, he could feel a familiar stirring. The calmness, the stillness that he'd inherited from his father. He had been taught to carry his composure like armor, to show strength not in words, but in silence. He could hear his dad's voice in his mind. Strength is in how you hold yourself, Malik. It's in your actions, not in what you say. Those words had stuck with him through the years, and they were the reason he hadn't backed down in class, why he hadn't flinched at the ridicule. The rumors of his father's legendary toughness had followed Malik through school, but until now, they'd always been just that, rumors. No one had ever dared to challenge them, and certainly no one had ever taken Malik seriously. But today it was different. The taunts and jokes didn't faze him. His father's legacy wasn't one of empty boasts or theatrical stunts. It was quiet, unseen power, the kind that made the world take notice without a single word. Malik knew the moment would come, the moment when someone would push him, test him, to see if the stories about Chuck Norris were real. And when that moment did come, he would be ready. He wasn't just his father's son by blood. He had inherited his strength, his discipline, his silence. He closed his locker with a soft click and walked toward his next class, the weight of his father's legacy heavy on his shoulders, but somehow, in a way, freeing. It wasn't a burden, it was a reminder of who he was and who he would become. The next day, Malik sat at the back of the classroom, his posture relaxed, though his mind was sharp. The bell rang, and the students shuffled in, their eyes glancing toward him with a mix of amusement and skepticism. Mr. Thompson entered, setting his books down with a sigh as he looked around the room. "All right, everyone settle down. We're picking up where we left off yesterday," he announced, but there was an undertone of something else in his voice, something almost apologetic, as if he regretted the previous day's jokes. Malik didn't react. He hadn't expected anything different. The whispers began almost immediately, like a ripple across the classroom. "Did you hear him? Chuck Norris's son, seriously?" A girl whispered from the front row, followed by a soft giggle. "I bet he's just trying to get attention." A boy added from behind Malik, his words heavy with disbelief. The laughter spread like wildfire. It was the same as the day before, mocking, dismissive. But this time, something in the air was different. The classroom, usually filled with chatter and light-hearted conversations, now felt like a stage for an unwelcome performance. They had all decided that Malik's claim was ridiculous, and they weren't afraid to make it clear. Malik didn't flinch. He focused on the front of the room, eyes steady, fingers tapping lightly against his desk. It wasn't the first time he'd been ridiculed for something out of his control, but this felt heavier. This wasn't just a question of his father's identity. It was a challenge to his own sense of self. But he remained calm. It was almost as if the laughter had no weight at all, like it was nothing more than a background noise that couldn't touch him. Mr. Thompson, sensing the growing tension, tried to steer the class back to the lesson. All right, enough. Let's focus on the work." But the laughter lingered, threading itself into the air, each chuckle and taunt another reminder that, for now, Malik's claim was still just a joke in their eyes. He could feel the heat of their laughter on his skin, but inside, he stayed cold, waiting for the moment when they would see who he really was. That evening, as Malik sat at the kitchen table, the weight of the day's laughter still hung around him, like an invisible cloud that wouldn't dissipate. His mother was in the living room, watching TV, the faint glow of the screen casting long shadows across the room. But Malik wasn't paying attention to her. He was lost in thought, his mind replaying the taunts, the snickers, and the doubts that filled the classroom. His father, Chuck Norris, had always been a figure of strength to him, but not in the way people saw on TV. Malik knew the stories, the ones about his dad's martial arts legend, his Hollywood fame, the battles fought on screen and in real life. But for Malik, Chuck Norris wasn't the action hero everyone thought they knew. To Malik, his father was something different. A man who had taught him that strength didn't come from bravado or showing off. It came from discipline, humility, and the ability to stay calm in the face of chaos. "Malik, you all right?" His mother's voice cut through the silence, gentle but knowing. He didn't answer at first, letting the quiet settle before speaking. "Mom, do you ever wonder if they're right? About me? About Dad?" She walked into the kitchen, her expression soft but firm. "What do you mean? Everyone at school, they think I'm lying. They're laughing. What if they're right? What if I'm just a joke?" His mother sat beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Malik," she said, her voice steady, Your father didn't become who he is by fighting for attention. He became who he is because he earned it. And so will you. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Malik turned to her, his eyes searching her face for reassurance. She smiled, a soft, knowing smile, one that only a mother could give. You carry his legacy in you, Malik. Not because you're his son, but because you share his strength. And that strength, son, comes from within. Malik nodded, feeling the weight of his father's legacy settle within him, solidifying his resolve. Tomorrow, things would be different. He wasn't just Chuck Norris's son. He was his own person, and that was more than enough. The next day, the whispers followed Malik like a shadow. It seemed impossible to escape. Even though the classroom was slightly quieter, he could still feel the weight of every gaze, every murmur as he walked through the halls. His classmates had become accustomed to seeing him as the quiet, composed kid until he had made the claim about his father. Now, he was the target of curiosity and ridicule in equal measure. As the days passed, doubt began to creep in. Was he really fooling himself? What if he was just a kid with a wild fantasy, clinging to something that wasn't true? He'd spent so much of his life trying to live up to the legacy of Chuck Norris. But was that really enough? What did it mean to be the son of a legend when no one believed him? In history class the following week, Malik felt the heat of the eyes upon him as he entered. Mr. Thompson barely looked up as Malik took his seat, but the room seemed to hum with a quiet tension. Malik opened his notebook, staring at the blank page for a moment before his mind began to drift. "All right, class," Mr. Thompson began, his voice echoing in the stillness. "We're going to discuss the concept of legacy today. What does it mean to leave a legacy behind? How do we measure it?" Malik's fingers hovered over his pencil, but he didn't write. He had always thought of legacy in a different way, something that couldn't be measured by fame or accomplishments, but by the quiet moments of integrity, by the actions that spoke louder than words. But as he sat there, listening to Mr. Thompson's words, he couldn't help but feel small. The legacy of Chuck Norris, the one he had always admired and tried to live up to, was being overshadowed by a story that wasn't his own. Doubt gnawed at him. Was he truly carrying his father's legacy? Or was he simply living in the shadow of a man who wasn't there to confirm it? The answer didn't come, and for the first time in a long time, Malik wasn't sure of the path ahead. The knock on the door came in the late afternoon, when the sun was low, casting a warm golden glow through the windows. Malik was sitting on the couch, absently flipping through his homework, when his mother answered. The moment she opened the door, a hushed silence fell over the room. "Mr. Norris." His mother's voice was a mix of surprise and caution. "What are you?" Malik's head snapped up at the sound of his father's name. He was already on his feet, his heart beating faster. His father's name had been spoken in his home 1,000 times, but never like this, never with the kind of respect and awe that filled the air now. At the doorway stood a tall man, dressed casually, but there was no mistaking the calm authority in his presence. His face was weathered, worn with age and wisdom, but there was a fire in his eyes that Malik immediately recognized. Chuck Norris stepped inside. Malik froze. This wasn't some distant dream or a half-forgotten story from his childhood. His father, his real father, was standing right there in front of him. The man who had always been a legend, a figure of myth and strength, was now standing in his own living room, looking just as Malik had always imagined, strong, composed, and unwavering. His mother stepped aside, still a little stunned, but her smile was soft, knowing. She didn't need to explain. This was real. Chuck Norris was here. Malik's pulse quickened as he stood motionless, unsure of what to do. His father looked at him for a moment, his eyes warm but serious, before walking over. "You doing all right, son?" His voice was deep, familiar. Malik could barely breathe. Yeah, just had a rough week." Chuck nodded, his expression unreadable but understanding. "Sometimes that happens. You just have to remember who you are." The words hit Malik like a wave. For the first time, he felt the weight of his father's legacy. This was real. Chuck Norris had come, not to confirm or deny his claim, but to show him something deeper. That strength wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It It was about standing firm, no matter what. The moment Chuck Norris stepped into the living room, the air seemed to shift. Malik stood frozen for a few seconds, still trying to process the reality of his father's sudden appearance. Chuck, as calm and collected as ever, looked around the room, his eyes settling briefly on the photo on the mantel. One of him and Malik when he was just a kid, a memory of simpler times. "Son," Chuck said, his voice steady but filled with an unspoken understanding. "You've been carrying a lot, haven't you?" Malik nodded, his throat tight. He had spent so many years silently grappling with the weight of his father's legacy. But now, in the presence of the man himself, it felt different, more real. He wanted to speak, to explain everything. The doubts, the laughter, the growing sense that he was just a kid living in a story too big for him. But the words wouldn't come. Chuck placed a hand on his shoulder, the gesture gentle yet firm. "You're not alone in this, Malik. You never have been." Malik finally met his father's gaze. There was no judgment in Chuck's eyes, no disbelief. Just patience, strength, and an understanding that went deeper than anything Malik could have imagined. For a moment, the world outside felt distant, irrelevant. There was just the two of them, father and son, and an unspoken connection that tied them together in ways words never could. Chuck didn't wait for Malik to say anything more. "Let's take a walk. I think it's time you learn a few things about what it means to stand tall." Without another word, he turned and walked toward the door, Malik following closely behind, the air outside cooler than expected, the wind carrying a slight chill that matched the nerves in Malik's stomach. This wasn't just a visit. It was the moment of reckoning he'd been waiting for, where his doubts would either be confirmed or laid to rest. As they walked in silence down the street, Chuck finally spoke again, his voice low but filled with purpose. "This is where your real training begins." And with that, Malik felt the weight of his father's words settle inside him. This was no longer about proving his heritage. It was about stepping into the man he was meant to become. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows as Malik and Chuck walked side by side, the quiet hum of the street filling the space between them. It had been an hour since they left the house, and despite the calm pace, Malik felt an unease grow in the pit of his stomach. He hadn't expected his father's visit to be this intense, this purposeful. "Why are we walking, Dad?" Malik finally asked, his voice cutting through the silence. Chuck turned to him, his expression unreadable, then gave a small, knowing smile. "Sometimes you need to move in order to see where you stand." Malik looked down at his feet as they walked. His mind was racing, trying to understand what his father meant. He hadn't come here just for a chat. This was different. The weight of Chuck's words hung heavy in the air, and Malik could feel the shift inside him. As they turned the corner onto a quieter street, a car suddenly pulled up beside them, the engine purring softly. The passenger window rolled down, revealing a familiar face, Detective Harris, a close family friend, who worked for the local police department. "Chuck, Malik," Harris said with a sharp nod. "I need your help." Malik's heart skipped a beat. Harris didn't look like he was here for a casual visit. Something was wrong. He glanced at his father, who remained calm, his expression unwavering. "What's going on?" Chuck asked, his voice low, but with the same intensity that Malik had always known. "We've got a situation," Harris replied. "A couple of the boys, people you know, have gotten themselves into some trouble. We need your help to sort it out." Malik glanced at his father, who was already moving toward the car, his body language shifting into something far more serious. "I'm listening." Harris's eyes flicked to Malik. "It's not safe. Not for anyone, especially you. I don't want to drag you into this." Chuck's hand rested briefly on Malik's shoulder. "He's coming with me," he said, his voice firm. The car door swung open, and Malik found himself stepping forward without thinking. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but one thing was clear. His father was leading him into something far bigger than what he had imagined. The next morning, Malik arrived at school with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions. The events from the night before still echoed in his thoughts. His father's presence, the quiet strength he exuded, and the call for help that had come out of nowhere. It was all a lot to process, especially when he still had to face the ridicule waiting for him at school. As he walked into history class, he saw Mr. Thompson already standing by the whiteboard, chalk in hand, ready to start the day's lesson. The room was quieter than usual, the tension palpable, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. Malik sat at his usual spot at the back, trying to avoid the eyes that he could feel on him. The morning passed slowly, each tick of the clock seeming to stretch the hours. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they were louder today, with more people talking about Malik's father and the claim he had made. It felt like every glance held a question. Was he lying? Was he really Chuck Norris's son? When the bell rang for lunch, Malik gathered his things slowly, not wanting to face the hallway just yet. He knew what was coming. Mr. Thompson approached him just as he was about to leave. "Malik, can I talk to you for a moment?" Malik nodded, though a sense of unease crept into his chest. He stayed put, watching as the rest of the class filtered out. "Listen," Mr. Thompson began, lowering his voice. "I wanted to apologize for how I handled things yesterday. I didn't mean to make you feel like you were the joke of the class." Malik didn't respond, his mind racing. He knew what was coming next. But Mr. Thompson continued, rubbing the back of his neck. "You have to understand that some people, they need to see it to believe it. And I can't go around telling everyone your father is who you say he is." Malik's eyes locked with his teacher's. "You don't have to tell them anything," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside him. "I'll show them myself." Mr. Thompson's expression faltered for a moment before he nodded, his voice taking on a different tone. "I see. Well, it's your life, Malik." As the teacher turned away, Malik felt the weight of those words. Maybe it wasn't about what others believed. It was about what he was willing to prove. The following afternoon, as the final bell of the day rang, Malik didn't head straight for the exit like usual. He had learned to avoid the spotlight, to slip through the crowd unnoticed, but today was different. Today he felt something shift inside him, a quiet determination that refused to hide. As he walked through the hallways, his footsteps quickened. The laughter, the whispers, the sidelong glances, they no longer held the same weight. In fact, they felt almost distant, as if the words didn't belong to him anymore. His mind wasn't on the taunts, it was on what his father had said, what he had shown him the night before. It was time to stop being the subject of ridicule and start taking control. Malik turned the corner into the gym, where the basketball team was practicing. Their loud, competitive energy spilled out of the gym doors, the sound of sneakers squeaking on the polished floors mixing with the occasional shout of encouragement. Malik hesitated for only a moment before he stepped inside, the doors swinging shut behind him. The players didn't notice him at first. He wasn't part of the team, wasn't even an athlete himself, but he knew what he had to do. The sound of the basketball bouncing echoed through the gym as Malik walked slowly toward the bench. One of the players, Brad, a senior known for his arrogance and bullying, turned to him, a smirk already creeping onto his face. "What's up, kid? You lost." Malik didn't flinch. "I'm here to play," he said simply. Brad laughed, the sound harsh, and the other players followed suit. "You? Play? This is for athletes, man. Go home." Without responding, Malik stepped onto the court, moving with surprising fluidity, his eyes locked on the ball. As the team snickered, Brad passed him the ball in a mocking gesture, but Malik's quick reflexes took over. He dribbled with smooth confidence, cutting through the defense with a precision that stunned everyone. He wasn't just playing basketball. He was proving something, not just to the team, but to himself. He was showing them what it meant to be underestimated. And in that moment, Malik wasn't the punchline of a joke. He was the hero, quiet and steady, playing his own game. Malik walked through the crowded hallway after class, his thoughts still lingering on the impromptu basketball game. The way the team had looked at him afterward, their eyes wide with surprise, the way they'd stopped laughing and started to watch him instead, it was a small victory, but it felt bigger than any shot he had made on the court. He was so lost in thought that he almost didn't notice the group standing ahead of him. Brad and a few of his friends were gathered by the lockers, their usual smug expressions plastered on their faces. Malik took a breath and kept walking, not planning to engage. He had nothing to prove to them anymore. But as he passed, Brad's voice rang out, louder than usual. "Hey, Malik, not bad on the court today, But it's not just about looking good. It's about being tough. And you're still just a kid, pretending to be someone you're not. Malik paused, his eyes narrowing. The word stung, but there was no flinch, no retreat. He had learned to stand firm, no matter how much they tried to chip away at him. Yeah, pretending to be Chuck Norris's kid. One of Brad's friends chimed in, sneering. Give it up. No one believes you. Malik didn't respond immediately. He just stood there for a moment, his gaze steady, his posture relaxed. The hallway seemed to grow quieter, like the space around them had expanded, creating a tension that everyone could feel. Brad, Malik said finally, his voice calm, controlled. It's not about what you believe. It's about who I am. I don't need your approval, and neither does my father. Brad scoffed, stepping closer, trying to intimidate him, but Malik remained unmoving. For a brief moment, Brad's confidence faltered, and that was enough. Without another word, Malik turned and continued down the hall, leaving behind the hushed whispers of disbelief and the weight of old expectations. This time, he didn't need to prove anything. He had already shown them who he was. The next morning, Malik walked into school with a new sense of purpose. He had expected things to go back to normal, but they didn't. The whispers had changed. They weren't just mocking him anymore. They were watching him. There was a shift in the air, a quiet anticipation that made him feel both exposed and empowered. It was the second day since the hallway encounter, and the atmosphere at school had shifted. Even Brad seemed to take a step back, his usual bravado replaced by a cautious distance. Malik didn't know whether it was because of the basketball game or the way he had handled the situation, but something had changed. He could feel it. As he walked into history class, he noticed that the usual suspects, those who had made him the target of their jokes, were quieter than before. The empty chair next to him, once a symbol of his isolation, now seemed like an invitation. Malik had expected the same laughter, the same taunts, but instead, the room felt different. It was almost as if they were waiting, unsure of how to react. Mr. Thompson entered, and the class settled down. He glanced briefly at Malik, a soft acknowledgement that didn't go unnoticed. The teacher had always been distant, but something about his demeanor had changed too. For the first time, Malik felt like he wasn't just another student in the room. He felt seen, not for who others thought he was, but for who he was becoming. The lesson began, but Malik's mind wasn't on the historical facts being delivered in front of him. Instead, he was thinking about the second chance he had been given, not just by his father, but by himself. A second chance to define his own legacy. A second chance to prove that he was more than just a rumor, more than a story about a famous name. By the end of class, something unexpected happened. Brad, the same person who had tried to belittle him, nodded at him as he walked by. It wasn't much, but it was enough. A second chance, a sign of respect. And for the first time, Malik felt like he had earned it. The following week, the tension in the air was thick with anticipation. Malik could feel it everywhere he went. People were talking, whispering, and sometimes even stopping to stare. He had spent his whole life trying to be invisible, to stay out of the spotlight, but now, everything was different. His father's legacy hung over him, and the challenge of proving himself was no longer just a distant idea. It was becoming real. It started with Brad, who had been unusually quiet for a while. But on that Thursday afternoon, as Malik was leaving the cafeteria, he heard it, loud, unmistakable. "Hey, Malik!" Brad's voice rang out, cutting through the hum of the hallway. Malik turned, his heart skipping a beat as he saw Brad, flanked by two of his friends, walking toward him with a purpose. Brad's smirk was back, but there was something else in his eyes, a challenge. "You're still pretending to be Chuck Norris's kid, huh? Still acting like you can back it up?" Malik's pulse quickened, but his expression remained calm. He had been expecting this, maybe even hoping for it. It was time. He had already shown them who he was with the basketball game and his quiet confidence. But this was different. This was the challenge he knew would come eventually. "Brad, I'm not pretending," Malik said, his voice steady. "I'm not trying to be anything. I'm just being myself. But if you think you can test that, I'm not going to back down." Brad's smirk widened, and he stepped closer, his chest puffed out. "Oh, I'm not just talking, Malik. I'm talking a real challenge. You and me. After school, we'll see if you've got what it takes." The challenge hung in the air, and the small crowd of students began to gather around them, watching, waiting. Malik could feel the weight of their eyes on him, the pressure building. He didn't hesitate. "Fine," he said, his words simple but unwavering. "Let's do it. But know this. This is about more than just you and me. It's about proving who I really am." The challenge was set, and Malik was ready. By the time Malik entered the school the next day, the news of the challenge had already spread like wildfire. It wasn't just the students who were talking. Even some of the teachers were whispering. Malik overheard snippets of conversation as he passed through the hallway. The words Chuck Norris, fight, and student challenge echoing off the walls. As he made his way to class, he noticed the usual group of teachers gathered in the staff room, their voices low and quick, as if trying to keep their conversation hidden from the students. But as Malik passed by the open door, he couldn't help but catch the fragments of their discussion. "He's really going to fight him?" Mrs. Holloway, the English teacher, asked, her tone disbelieving. "It's madness," Mr. Blake, the gym teacher, added. "I don't care who his father is. No student should be getting into this kind of thing." "He's bound to get hurt," Mrs. Thompson, the school counselor, murmured. "The other kids got experience. Malik's just a kid. He doesn't have anything to prove." There was a brief silence, followed by the sound of shuffling papers and murmurs from the other teachers. "But you know," Mr. Blake continued, his voice a little quieter, "there's something about that kid. The way he carries himself. He got the look of someone who knows what he's doing, even if he doesn't show it." Malik stood frozen for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't realized how much the staff had been talking about him, how much attention this challenge had drawn. The whispers weren't just among the students. They were starting to affect everyone around him. As he walked away from the staff room, a small knot of doubt began to form in his stomach. Was he ready for this? Was he really prepared to face Brad, to step into the ring and prove everything he had been trying to show? But as he pushed the thoughts aside, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything he had already faced. The afternoon seemed to drag on forever. Every minute felt stretched, each second heavier than the last. Malik sat in class, unable to focus on anything except the challenge that awaited him after school. His mind kept returning to the whispers, the way the eyes of his classmates followed him as he moved through the halls. By the time the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Malik's heart was already racing. The tension in the air was palpable, as if everyone knew something was about to happen. He stood up, gathered his things, and walked toward the door, his movements slow but deliberate. He didn't glance at anyone. He didn't need to. The challenge had already been set. Outside, the sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange glow over the schoolyard. A crowd had already gathered, some of the students leaning against the fence, others standing in small groups, waiting for the showdown. Brad was already there, pacing back and forth, his friends clustered around him, hyping him up. Malik took a deep breath as he approached, the air cool against his skin. He had no idea what Brad was capable of, but that didn't matter. What mattered now was proving something far more important, who he was and who he was willing to become. "Malik," Brad called, a sneer on his face. "You ready to finally show us what you've got?" Malik didn't respond with words. He just stepped into the small circle that had formed around them, facing Brad squarely. The crowd went silent, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. For a moment, there was nothing but stillness. Then, Brad lunged at him, his movements sharp and aggressive. Malik moved instinctively, his body responding with a calm precision that felt both foreign and familiar. The fight wasn't just physical, it was mental too. A test of his patience, his discipline, his very ability to remain grounded. Brad's attack was relentless, but Malik's responses were measured. Every move, every shift in his stance was a reflection of everything his father had taught him. This wasn't just about the fight, it was the test he'd been waiting for. And this time, Malik wasn't going to fail. The fight had only just begun, but already Malik could feel the difference in the way he was moving. Brad's attacks were fast and wild, fueled by arrogance and the need to prove himself. His punches came like bullets, each one designed to overpower, to dominate, to humiliate. But Malik, despite the adrenaline surging through his veins, remained calm. Every strike Brad threw was met with a subtle sidestep, a controlled block, a calculated parry. The crowd around them was alive with energy, their shouts and cheers filling the air. But to Malik, the noise was nothing more than background static. The only sound that mattered was the rhythm of his own breath, the steady beat of his heart. Brad's frustration grew with each failed strike, and Malik could see it in the young fighter's eyes. He was losing control. That was his mistake. Brad's power was in his fury, but Malik's power was in his stillness. His ability to remain grounded, to let the storm rage around him without getting swept up in it. Brad swung again, this time with a sweeping hook meant to knock Malik off balance. But Malik saw it coming, as if in slow motion. He shifted his weight, ducked under the punch, and in one fluid motion, countered with a sharp jab to Brad's ribs. The blow wasn't violent, wasn't meant to harm, but it sent a message. Brad stumbled back, gasping for air. Malik didn't smile, didn't taunt. He didn't need to. His calm composure, his unwavering focus. Those things spoke louder than any words could. The crowd went quiet for a moment, sensing the shift in the energy. Brad, still breathing heavily, wiped the sweat from his brow and stared at Malik, his expression faltering. He had been expecting someone who would fight with the same aggression, the same loud energy he used. But Malik wasn't playing that game. Malik stepped forward, his movements fluid, controlled. "I'm not here to prove anything to you, Brad," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the silence. "I'm just here to show you the difference between strength and arrogance." Brad didn't respond. He couldn't. The truth had already been spoken. The fight had ended as quickly as it had started. Brad was on the ground, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling in quick, uneven gasps. Malik stood above him, his posture relaxed, his chest steady. There had been no showmanship, no dramatic movements, just control, just quiet strength. The crowd had gone silent, their excitement evaporating into an uneasy stillness as they realized that the spectacle they had hoped for had never come. Brad lay there for a moment longer than necessary, trying to catch his breath, his eyes locked on Malik, as if trying to make sense of what had just happened. Finally, with a grunt, he pushed himself to his feet, his body shaking with frustration and disbelief. The crowd waited, anticipating his next move, but Malik didn't budge. He simply watched, calm, unwavering. Brad wiped the sweat from his forehead and glared at Malik, his pride bruised. "You got lucky," he muttered under his breath. But Malik didn't respond. Instead, he turned away, walking toward the center of the circle. He didn't need to say anything more. The fight was over, and the point had been made. As Malik walked away from the crowd, a ripple of murmurs spread through the students. They began to move, slowly at first, then with more confidence as the realization set in. Malik hadn't just fought Brad. He had fought every assumption they had ever made about him. And he had won, not with violence or bravado, but with something deeper, something that couldn't be measured in punches or taunts. A voice cut through the tension. It was Mr. Thompson, who had been watching from the edge of the crowd. "Malik," he called, his voice carrying over the murmurs. Malik turned, the quiet strength still emanating from him as he walked back toward the teacher. "You've done more than just prove a point today," Mr. Thompson said, his tone shifting from disbelief to respect. "You've shown everyone here what real strength looks like." Malik nodded, a subtle but powerful gesture. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about the fight. It was about standing firm, even when the world around you doubted you. And in that moment, Malik knew. He had finally earned the respect he had been seeking, not just from others, but from himself. The next day, Malik walked through the school halls with a different kind of energy. It was as though the air itself had shifted overnight, lighter, freer. The whispers, the doubts, and the ridicule had faded, replaced by something else, a cautious respect. People didn't stare at him the same way anymore. The mockery had been replaced with curiosity, with a silent acknowledgement of the fact that Malik had proven something that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. As he passed by Brad in the hallway, there was no sneer, no smirk, no loud comment. The encounter was silent, but spoke volumes. Brad gave him a quick nod, barely noticeable, but enough for Malik to catch it. It was the first time that Brad had acknowledged him without mockery, without the bravado that had defined him until now. Malik kept walking, his pace unhurried, but his heart was lighter than it had been in a long time. When Malik entered history class, the room seemed quieter than usual. There was no chatter as the students took their seats. It was as if they were all waiting, unsure of what to say or how to act. Mr. Thompson stood at the front, ready to start the lesson, but he paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the room. "Malik," he said finally, his voice steady but different. "I want to say, you've done something none of us expected yesterday. But it's not just about what happened in that fight. It's about how you handled yourself before, during, and after. You showed what it means to have control, not just over others, but over yourself." The class remained still, the weight of his words settling in. Malik's eyes met his teacher's, and for the first time, he felt a deep sense of understanding between them. The respect he had earned wasn't just from the fight. It was from the quiet strength he had carried throughout. As the class began, Malik sat with a newfound sense of peace. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was finally living, fully aware of the person he was becoming. The world around him had finally opened its eyes. And so had he. The week following the fight passed in a strange haze for Malik. His classmates treated him differently, less like a target and more like someone to be watched from a distance, their curiosity simmering under the surface. He had earned their respect, but the cost of his own sense of normalcy. His life had shifted in ways he hadn't anticipated, and the expectations of those around him felt heavier with each passing day. It was after school on Friday when the world as Malik knew it was turned upside down. He had just finished his last class, heading for the bus, when he was stopped by someone he didn't expect to see. Detective Harris, the family friend who had visited a few days earlier, was standing near the gates, his expression grim. "Malik," Harris called, his voice low and serious. "We need to talk." Malik's heart dropped. "What's going on?" Without answering, Harris led him to a quiet corner of the parking lot, away from prying eyes. Malik's mind raced, his thoughts flashing back to the mysterious call for help and his father's words about strength and responsibility. "Is something wrong with Dad?" Malik's voice was tight with anxiety. Harris hesitated, his jaw tense as he searched for the right words. "It's about your father. Something's come up. We need to move fast." Malik's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" "Your father's been targeted. We don't have all the details yet, but there's a threat, one that's very real. It's tied to some old enemies of his from his past. People who are using his name for their own agenda." Malik froze. "What are you saying? Are they coming after us?" Harris nodded slowly. "You've been dragged into something bigger than you realize, Malik. Your father's enemies are still out there, and they've noticed you. You need to stay close, stay alert. This isn't over." Malik felt his world shift again. Everything he thought he understood, his father's legacy, his own role, suddenly seemed so small. The unbelievable truth that had always been just stories now stood before him, waiting for him to confront it head-on. The legacy of Chuck Norris wasn't just about strength. It was about survival, about navigating the dangers of a world that was far more complex than he'd ever imagined. And now, he had no choice but to face it. The following days felt like a blur for Malik. Every time he passed through the school halls, he could feel the change, the way people looked at him with newfound respect. It wasn't just the students anymore. His teachers, too, seemed to view him differently. Mr. Thompson had acknowledged him with a nod in class, and even Coach Blake had given him a rare smile in the hallway. Malik's fight with Brad had done more than just silence his critics. It had opened a door that Malik hadn't even known was there. But despite all the external changes, the real shift had happened inside of him. The quiet strength that had carried him through the challenge, the discipline his father had instilled in him, was beginning to define who he was, not just in school, but in life. He wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. He had nothing left to prove. The fight had taught him something far more valuable than victory. It had taught him what it meant to stand firm in his own truth, regardless of how others saw him. One afternoon, as Malik sat at lunch, he noticed Brad walking toward him. The same Brad who had mocked him, challenged him, and fought him just a week ago. This time, though, there was no arrogance in his steps. There was no sneer or taunt. He was walking slowly, his eyes fixed on Malik. When he reached the table, Brad paused for a moment. Malik didn't say anything, just looked up at him, waiting. "Hey," Brad said, his voice quieter than usual. I wanted to say, respect. What you did out there. How you handled everything, man. It wasn't what I expected." Malik raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this was going, but nodded nonetheless. "Thanks." Brad shifted his weight, his hands in his pockets. "You showed me something. I was just out there trying to act tough, you know. But you were calm, and you didn't need to make a scene to prove yourself. I got a lot more respect for you now." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Malik didn't need to say anything more. The respect was mutual. In that moment, the challenge, the fight, and everything that had come before it had brought them to a new understanding. And for Malik, that was all that mattered. The following Monday, Malik walked into school with a sense of anticipation, though he tried not to show it. The weekend had passed in a quiet whirlwind of thoughts. His own, his father's, and even those of the people around him. He had proven his strength, but now it was time to see how others would truly react. He wasn't concerned with the usual whispers anymore. He knew he had already earned their respect, but the real test lay ahead. How would Brad handle his own defeat? As Malik walked into history class, he spotted Brad sitting at his usual desk, his eyes fixed on the front. The tension between them had been palpable ever since the fight, and although they had shared a moment of respect the week before, it hadn't settled fully in the air. Brad wasn't the kind of person to just let things go. Malik sat down quietly, but it didn't take long for Brad to speak up. The class was still settling in when he cleared his throat. "Hey, Malik," Brad said, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of a few students around him. Malik looked up, expecting another challenge, another jab. But instead, Brad was standing, a rare sincerity in his eyes. I want to say something," Brad continued, his voice steady, but with an edge of vulnerability that Malik wasn't used to hearing from him. "What happened between us last week? I was a jerk. I know it. And I just want to say, I'm sorry." The room fell into a stunned silence. Students exchanged confused glances, unsure of what to make of Brad's unexpected admission. Brad's posture wasn't defensive like it had always been. This time, he was standing tall, not in defiance, but in acknowledgement. "I let my pride get in the way. I thought I had to prove something, but all I did was make myself look stupid. So, sorry, man," Brad said, his gaze meeting Malik's. Malik's heart softened, and for the first time, he didn't just see Brad as the arrogant bully. He saw him as someone who had learned something, someone who had faced his own flaws and owned up to them. He nodded slowly. "It's all right," Malik said, his voice calm. "We all make mistakes." The class seemed to exhale collectively, as though the tension had been broken. And in that moment, Malik realized something profound. Sometimes, respect isn't just earned in a fight. It's earned in the strength to admit when you're wrong. The weeks after the challenge felt like a turning point in Malik's life. The whispers had mostly faded, replaced by an unspoken understanding that lingered in the hallways. Brad had kept his distance, but there was no more animosity, no more sneers or challenges. Malik had earned the respect of his peers, not through physical strength, but through the quiet confidence he had shown in the face of adversity. One afternoon, after school, Malik found himself in the gym again. The basketball team was practicing, but he wasn't there to play. He had come to talk to Coach Blake, who had taken him under his wing since the fight with Brad. Coach Blake was wiping down a set of weights when he noticed Malik approaching. "What's up, Malik?" he asked, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Malik hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about the fight and about what happened after. I know I didn't win by knocking anyone out, but it feels like something changed inside me. I'm not just a quiet kid anymore." Coach Blake leaned against the wall, nodding. "That's the real victory, Malik. Strength isn't just about winning or losing in front of an audience. It's about what you do when no one's watching. It's about how you carry yourself, whether you're in the gym, in class, or in the real world." Malik absorbed the words, letting them settle in. He had learned so much about himself in the last few weeks, but hearing it from Coach Blake, someone who had seen it all, gave the lessons even more weight. You've got a strong foundation, kid, Coach Blake continued. But it's not just about proving your strength to others. It's about learning when to use it and when to hold back. You're not just a fighter. You're a leader, even if you don't always feel like one. Malik nodded, the weight of Coach Blake's words sinking in. He hadn't just learned to fight. He had learned to lead, not through force, but through integrity and composure. As he walked out of the gym later that day, Malik realized that the real lessons weren't the ones taught in a classroom. They were the ones learned in the quiet moments, the ones that shaped who he was becoming. It was a Friday afternoon, and Malik was walking through the school courtyard, his mind lost in thoughts of the week. The tension that had once weighed heavily on his shoulders had lifted, replaced by a kind of peaceful confidence he hadn't known before. Life at school had returned to some form of normalcy. No more ridicule, no more challenges. He was just Malik, and for the first time, that felt like enough. As he passed by the main entrance, something caught his eye, a car parked near the curb that he hadn't seen before. It was sleek, dark, and unmistakably high-end. The kind of car people only dream about owning, let alone seeing in the school parking lot. He slowed his pace, curiosity gnawing at him. Then a familiar voice called his name from behind. Malik! He turned, and there stood Chuck Norris, his father, leaning casually against the car. For a moment, Malik just stared, taken off guard. His father hadn't been in town much lately. Always on the move, always busy. To see him here, waiting for him, felt surreal. Dad? Malik asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Chuck smiled, a rare, soft smile that seemed to bridge the distance between them. I thought we'd take a little trip today. I've got a gift for you. A gift? Malik echoed, stepping closer. What's going on? Chuck opened the passenger door and gestured for Malik to get in. As Malik slid into the seat, he realized just how expensive this car was. It wasn't just a car. It was a symbol, an acknowledgement of everything he had been through and everything he had become. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Chuck turned to him, his tone serious but warm. You've earned this, Malik. Not just the car, but the man you're becoming. I've been proud of you for a long time, but I'm especially proud of you now. You've learned that true strength isn't about what others think. It's about standing tall, no matter what. Malik couldn't help but smile. This wasn't just a gift. It was his father's way of telling him he had finally arrived. The car hummed steadily beneath them as Malik and his father drove through the city, the streets passing by like a blur. The world felt different now, quieter in a way, but also filled with new possibilities. Malik's mind was still processing everything that had happened. The fight, the respect he'd earned, and the unexpected gift his father had given him. But more than anything, he felt something new inside him, a sense of direction, a feeling that he was ready for whatever came next. As they reached the outskirts of the city, Chuck slowed the car and turned onto a familiar road, one that Malik hadn't traveled in years. The area was more rural, the landscape dotted with trees and open fields. It was a part of his father's world that Malik hadn't seen much of, a place where his father's legacy had been built not just through fame, but through hard work and resilience. Chuck parked the car in front of a small cabin, tucked away near a quiet creek. The door swung open, and a gentle breeze ruffled the leaves of the trees surrounding the property. This is where I come when I need to reset, Chuck said, looking over at Malik with a small, knowing smile. I want you to have a place like this too, somewhere you can find peace, somewhere you can remember who you are and what you've already overcome. Malik stepped out of the car, taking in the peaceful surroundings. It was everything he hadn't realized he needed, a place to think, to grow, and to find clarity. Chuck walked over and placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. This is your new beginning, son. It's not about who you were before or what others expect of you. It's about who you choose to be from here on out. And I know you're going to make something great of it. Malik nodded, the weight of his father's words settling deep within him. This wasn't just a gift. It was a chance to build a future on his own terms. And as he stood there, looking out at the horizon, he felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing that the strength he'd been searching for had always been inside him. This was just the beginning.